Hello everyone, my name is Nathaniel Skidmore, and this video is going to serve as a brief documentary style video about the life and work of Dr. Marie Curie. So, to kick things off here, good insert time of day here everyone, morning, evening, night, whenever you're choosing to listen to this, good time of day to you, everyone. Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into the scientific and personal life of Dr. Marie Curie. We're going to lean our focus towards the scientific parts of her life, but there will be some non-scientific background and related information that I think will be necessary for us to understand. The target audience for this video, the goal audience that I want to be able to reach with this video would be those that are interested in the history and influence of Dr. Curie and how they can communicate this information to others. This particularly applies to the science fields, of course, because her work was in science and her biggest influences were in science. But I think it is important that in scientific content, not to only present information to an audience, but to also guide the audience in how best they can present this information to other people. This video is more relevant to you as a viewer if you can communicate and retain information that is discussed in this video. So that's what I'm hoping to achieve here. Now, let's begin with a brief introduction to the personal life of Dr. Marie Curie. But before we get into that brief introduction, I wanted to take a moment to look at the quote that we put on our title slide here. I try to include a quote with every major section of this mini documentary. And this quote goes, "One never notices what has been done, one can only see what remains to be done." And that Dr. Marie Curie quote really sticks out to me because she was able to accomplish so much in her life. And the quote is just trying to note that, all of it can tend to get overlooked. But it is important to celebrate accomplishments that have been made, and we should celebrate those accomplishments and not overlook what she was able to do scientifically just to see what hasn't been done yet. So definitely be keeping that in mind. And now we're going to be moving into the biography segment of this presentation. So, biography. We're going to take a couple minutes here to discuss Dr. Curie's upbringing and early years. So Marie Sklodowska was born on November 7th, 1867 in Warsaw, Poland. Now, an interesting side note about her last name, the English translation of her last name is disputed on how it is spelled, and I went with Sklodowska with a V in it instead of Sklodowska with a W, and I did that because the biography I was reading to help prepare for this project was wrote by one of her children. It was wrote by Eve Curie, and Eve Curie, her daughter, decided to write it with a V instead of a W there, and I would trust how her daughter translates Dr. Curie's original last name. So, her childhood nickname, Dr. Marie Curie's childhood nickname was Manya. Dr. Curie was born as the fifth child of teachers, and it is because both of her parents were teachers that Dr. Curie was able to receive so much education and encouragement in education from a young age. Women were not encouraged to pursue a higher education in the time of Dr. Curie's youth, being born in 1867. And it is because of influential scientists like her that women were able to receive support in the field of science today. So Dr. Curie was also raised in poverty. The biggest cause of poverty in her family was living in Russia-controlled Poland at the time. She was a native-born Polish, and, Poland was being very oppressed where she lived by Russia. So Dr. Curie also demonstrated from a very young age extreme amounts of intelligence, even under pressure. So, trying to lead that into a story to demonstrate what I'm talking about here. Students in Russia-controlled Poland at the time were supposed to be educated in Russian history if they were educated at all. So Dr. Curie's boarding school teacher educated all of her students in Polish history, because she didn't agree with the ruling in the area, and she wanted to honor the home country of Poland. so her young education was both secret and illegal. There's a story of an inspector showing up to the classroom one day unannounced. The school bell rang in a special way to signal to the class that the inspector was coming and they better get ready. So all the students hid all of their schoolwork and got out equipment for stitch work. Think about sewing and sewing-related things. I believe they were sewing buttons at the time, or sewing thread onto buttons at the time. The inspector came into the classroom, and it was his job to question one of the students on Russian customs and history to determine that, if they are receiving an education, it is a proper Catholic Russian education. Little Manya was always selected because of her perfect and fluent Russian, and she was able to answer every one of the inspector's questions with perfection, accuracy, and correct pronunciation. And the inspector left thinking that the students were receiving that proper Russian education. And this all took place while Dr. Curie was the youngest member of her class by 2 years. By the time Dr. Curie was 12, she had lost both her mother and her eldest sister. Dr. Curie suffered very many things, tragically, emotionally, from a young age. So the pain and weight of darkness that she had felt in her had crushed the Christian faith that she had grew up in, and she was never able to gain it again later in life. It is noted in the biography written by her daughter Eva that the Sklodowska children grew up and eventually became incredibly beautiful when they were young adults. And this is important to note because they noted this for all of the siblings except for Dr. Marie Curie, who was instead noted to have developed a weight problem. And I thought that was a very funny note to add in, and that just adds credit to how interesting it is when you have a family member write the biography about someone. They'll include those things that normally wouldn't be kept in, like those embarrassing details. But around the time that Dr. Curie finished secondary school, it was noted that she had eventually developed into the most beautiful of all her siblings. So, that is a happy ending to that story. And I think this gives us a complete enough glimpse into the younger years of Dr. Marie Curie. The biggest takeaway from this section should be the impoverished conditions she grew up in and her incredible intelligence from a young age, alongside the tragedies that she faced in losing both her mother and her oldest sibling. So the next section we're going to look into is going to cover Dr. Curie's college education and a lot of her scientific work. But before we get into that, I wanted to look at the quote for the biography section because I do like these quotes for these different sections here. This was probably my favorite part of the whole presentation, is looking for these quotes and making these connections. So, one never notices what has been done, one can only see what remains to be done. Now that is actually the quote that is from the very first slide, but I thought it was very important that we have that quote again, to try to get the repetition, to encourage us to remember. One never notices what has been done, one can only see what remains to be done. And I think Dr. Curie is a perfect example of that. You look at all the scientific accomplishments that she had that we're going to discuss. We're going to discuss a lot of them. And she had many more that, I can't fit into a 10 to 15 minute video. But, Dr. Curie was able to accomplish so much in her life, and, she was able to overcome just so much adversity. And I think that's important and it should be celebrated. So that's what we're trying to do here through this video. We're trying to celebrate those accomplishments. So on to the section about college and career. Dr. Curie went to Paris in 1891 to try to further her education. She was able to earn licensure in both physics and mathematical sciences from the Sorbonne, which is a major university in Paris, France. She met her husband Pierre Curie at the university in 1894 and married him a year later. She eventually was able to replace her husband Pierre as the head of the physics laboratory for the Sorbonne. Dr. Curie isolated polonium alongside her husband Pierre after the breakthrough research and discovery of radium by Henri Becquerel in 1896. Dr. Curie conducted her research alongside teaching and alongside her husband. She and her husband had to teach constantly just to be able to financially make ends meet, Paris is a very expensive city to live in, and they weren't making all that much money. So they were working themselves ragged just to be able to sustain themselves and then try to do research on the side. Think about that, what they were going through, just energy and time-wise, and being able to make these just miraculous discoveries. So in 1903, she was able to receive the Nobel Prize in Physics alongside her husband and alongside Henry Becquerel for their collective contributions to the field of radioactivity. Dr. Curie later that year also got her doctorate. So that's very exciting, you know. You win a Nobel Prize and you get your doctorate in the same year. You know, that's just unbelievable stuff. So Dr. Curie became the first woman to win the Nobel Prize for her groundbreaking contributions in research about radioactivity. And that was in 1903. That was, as of the recording of this video, 117 years ago. So a key component to her and Pierre winning the Nobel Prize alongside Henry Becquerel was their isolation of the element polonium. Dr. Curie named polonium after her home country of Poland. You know, throughout her life, she had a very strong connection to her home country of Poland. But following the tragic death of her husband, Dr. Curie went on to become the first female professor at the Sorbonne in 1906. Dr. Curie continued her research and went on to win a second Nobel Prize in 1911. This second Nobel Prize was in the field of chemistry. Dr. Curie became the first person to ever win a second Nobel Prize. Nobody had ever won a second Nobel Prize in their lifetime before Dr. Curie had this absolutely unbelievable achievement in 1911. So this Nobel Prize was awarded to her primarily for her isolation of radium. Dr. Curie's extensive work in radioactivity led to her death eventually in 1934. Dr. Curie died of radiation poisoning-induced leukemia, and it was because of her fantastic research that we have such a strong understanding of radiation today. You know, the biggest drawback of her research was that it did directly lead to her death, but the biggest takeaway of the career of Dr. Curie would be that she earned substantial recognition and respect in the world of science and has had a very strong, lasting impact on the field of science for everyone. Her dedication to scientific research did eventually cost her life, but she has saved many countless people directly because of her research. Dr. Curie's contributions are still felt in the field of medicine today. Her research has been incredibly useful in the advancement of X-ray technology. The best thing that I want you to take away from this video, you know, the absolute best thing that you could take away from this video, is that Dr. Curie was able to overcome overwhelming circumstances to carve out a path to scientific advancement. Not only did Dr. Curie carve out a path to reach the highest levels of science, she then continued on and pushed further into the field of science beyond what was understood. As an impoverished woman under oppressive Russian rule, Dr. Curie was able to advance so far in the field of science as to set the new standard of excellence and achievement. This story is relevant to the field of science education as a tool of encouragement to any student, to any teacher, and in any classroom. Science still has so much left to be discovered, and there's absolutely room for anyone to advance and to set the standard of acceptable practice. This is also relevant to science education because Dr. Curie was a professor while she was conducting her research. Dr. Curie was able to not only teach, but to stay at the top of her field of research. And I'm going to close with one more quote from Dr. Curie. When radium was discovered, nobody knew that it would prove useful in hospitals. The work was one of pure science, and this is a proof that scientific work must not be considered from the point of view of the direct usefulness of it. You know, Dr. Curie was researching science with a childlike wonder and just awe at so many things that weren't understood, and I think that's how more people need to be approaching science. They need to just look at it and go, wow. You know, that's why we have engagement in the 5 E's, and that's why we start with engagement in the 5 E's, because you want to make that connection to just how amazing it is. So I wanted to thank you if you stuck through to the end of this video, and I want to celebrate with some our works referenced here. These were the Google Books link to the biography I read and a couple other web sources that I used to help me out here, and they helped me with my quotes. And then to celebrate here at the end, we have our credits. So thank you everybody so much for watching, and I hope you have a very, very nice remainder of your day. Goodbye.